start by saying thank you for making the effort to be here. It's so nice to be face to face. It's so important that we debate and explore and challenge ourselves around these issues in a way that is much more meaningful, I think, with some personal interaction, so I'm really grateful to you for that. I also want to just start by saying some thank yous to our Unit Connect partners who have been the reason we're able to be here for funding this work, but not just this, the long series of work we've done developing the Thriving Lives Toolkit in the school sector, and the scoping research that made this research possible, and also then this. So thank you very much for your long-standing partnership. I know we've got some exciting plans about the next few years as well. But also to the University of Winchester, who added additional funding, which has made it possible for us to be here today, to extend the research beyond the boundaries of England. So we're really grateful to the University of Winchester that hosts the Alliance still. And also a huge thank you to CfEY, to Ellie and to Anamaria, and you have another colleague here, at least one I think. Thank you very much for your support. I have to say, I don't know if you've ever had to do work in the field of further education, but the challenge of engagement is a considerable one. And I can see some of the nodding heads that you know what that's like. Adding the complexities, especially what we know now of the poor awareness that there is around armed forces, children and young people, and you get a very challenging brief. But CfEY have done a grand job in meeting that brief and getting us some really meaningful and significant findings as a result. So thank you so much for all that. I want to say a couple of things, just my own reflections about what I think we find, and also some of the messages. I think there are some positive and clear ways forward. I've spoken a few times about how the Alliance characterises service children's lives through 4Ds of diversity, of discontinuity that results from that potential for development, positive, that can come, and also then the risk of disadvantage. I think we've learned something. Our thinking has moved on as a result of this research in regards to how disadvantage is experienced, and that is pertinent, particularly, of course, because of the pledge, the Armed Forces Covenant. Not least because elements of that now are now written in law, thanks to the Armed Forces Act. We've learned that barriers of a systemic nature, extrinsic barriers outside the lives of the young person, in themselves create experiences of disadvantage. Access to normal systems can be more difficult for an armed forces young people. Challenges around funding, options about where one goes to study, and all those kinds of things. A range of systemic barriers that, as adults, the people in the system, it's our collective responsibility to do something about. And I think this report has really moved our thinking on and understanding that there are systemic barriers that we need to think of explicitly. And that those also, in two ways, really interestingly, I think this shows us, they create some of those disadvantages that are intrinsic to young people, the experiences they have, the impacts on their own self-perceptions, as well as on their learning, their access to curriculum, the outcomes that they achieve. So there are those disadvantages as well. But something I found that was really compelling in this work is the relationship between those two things. We'll find, I think, really interesting meat in pursuing, understanding how these are not two just companion challenges, systemic barriers and the needs of young people. We've learned in this research for the first time that some of those needs in the young people are the reason why they might struggle to access the very support we put in place to address the systemic barriers. Some of those things that can be, and certainly are, advantages that can be accrued from armed forces life, a sense of independence perhaps, of greater maturity, coupled with things like additional caring responsibilities, start to be the reason why you might discount yourself from accessing support. Might be the reason why you just don't ask for it in the first place. So it's really interesting that I think we're starting in our thinking more generally, beyond the scope of this research. I think we're being challenged to think about how the system and the young person interact in these very unique circumstances. And I think it says in the report, therefore, 3 areas which need attention, and has some really useful pointers for how we might start that. At the macro level, at the meso level, in terms of regional, local institutional activity, but also at the micro level, what do you do as an individual young person? So at the macro level, there are obvious national policy things which we're going to explore today. One of them stands out for me. It's like the refrain of a never-ending song, data, data, data. If someone could come up with a tune that goes with that, then I think we'll be reminded daily. We know the challenges around that. We've got evidence now of the way in which that creates challenges in the further education, the post-16 sector. That has to be our refrain, data, data, data. So there's work to be done to collect it in comprehensive, consistent ways, to collate it into data sets that can be useful, and to share it. The best solutions we've got in the community are the community. There are people who want to know, people who are able to do things about understanding their own circumstances, the context in which they work, and the support they could provide if the data was made available. At the meso level, I think a really good example comes out of the report, which is super practical, and we look forward to building on, as I'm sure you will expect. There are 7 principles in here of how an institution should be reflecting on their practice. 7 principles that go straight to the heart, not only of practical things you can do, but also the culture, our understanding of the way we think about the support we provide for children and young people from armed forces families. So there's some really simple messages there about some first steps. And you won't be surprised to know that we're going to be pulling out all the stops to translate that into something meaningful and practical, like the Thriving Lives toolkit that we have in the school sector already. And I think finally, though, at the micro level of the individual, this is really important. It's a message that we started out with, understanding that because of this huge diversity that young people have, it was imperative that the support we provide starts with really effective, meaningful listening. We need to treat individuals as individuals. There is no such thing as the service child experience. There are service children, as many and diverse as there are for any other group, for each of us. Our experiences are hugely unique. So it's really important that we start with that really effective listening. I commend to you the work we've done already and others have done on effective listening. If you're going to do it well, be deliberate, be open, be student-centred, and be willing to change if you want good listening. But that really, I think, is at the heart of how we're going to make a change in this sector. Is colleges, other further education and post-16 providers listening effectively to young people, understanding the ways in which the support you provide at a universal level as well as at a tailored level respond to those individual needs. But it's also how you build sustained engagement for that cohort, so that the sense of belonging that we know various pieces of research have identified can be a barrier, can be addressed. So I'm really grateful that we've got some really clear ways forward at all of those different ways. We've got opportunity today together to work out how can we go about doing that. And so I just commend this opportunity to you. Please engage in that. We want your practical solutions. We want to know the challenges that you're facing. We want to know how together we can make that difference. And my last appeal then is just let's make sure that in all that we're doing, we're listening to individual young people's lives and tailoring our support accordingly. Thank you very much for that. I'm really delighted to be able to introduce Anamaria and Ellie, who are going to be presenting the research today, and hope you'll find great benefit from, as we have, from findings. Thanks, Ellie.
Hi everybody. You guys, hello, you're welcome to come in and take a seat. I don't want you to have to stand because it's not super short, so I think there's a seat there and some just on the So, welcome everybody. We're so glad to have you all here today, not least because I have nightmares about presenting to an empty room, and so hopefully I don't have to do that. But mainly because we are excited to share with you our research findings from this really exciting, really important project which we've been running since early this year, to look into how we can support armed forces young people in this crucial stage of their education. My name is Ellie Mulcahy. I'm the Director of Research and Operations at the Centre for Education and Youth, and this is my colleague, Anamaria Granada. We co-led this research, and we are really excited to share with you the findings. As you can see, the agenda today is that we're going to do, I would say, a fairly full presentation. We've got you in the room. We just really wanted to provide that detail, give you the opportunity to ask questions, and sort of really get into the findings. That said, I'm aware it is a little bit long. If you need to pop out bathrooms or through here, you know, it's not a classroom anymore. I'm no longer leading a classroom of 4-year-olds, so you're welcome to do that. You're welcome to grab a juice, grab pastries, you know, just to feel that you can do so. We'll then have a short opportunity for Q&A from you guys if you've got any questions on the basis of our research presentation. We'll then have a quick comfort break, just give everybody a little chance to have that break before we go into our panel discussion with our amazing panellists that fill the chair. And then we're going to kick it back to you guys a little bit and ask for some feedback, some commitments where possible to helping the SCiP Alliance to further the recommendations. So I'm going to see how this goes then. Low tech. So our report, Diversity Meets Complexity, is the first research beyond the pre-project scoping research that was done a couple of years ago that looks at this age group of armed forces families, or armed forces young people. And we have named the report Diversity and Complexity to the points that Phil has already spoken to, because we think the central point that we want to get across to anybody engaging with this research is that young people's lives are diverse. We found significant variation across the different young people that we spoke to in terms of their experience of armed forces life itself, but crucially whether they experience disadvantage as a result of their experiences in service family. And the complexity speaks to the fact that in comparison to the school sector, not to say the school sector doesn't have its complexities, but the post-16 sector is highly complicated. There's different types of settings providing different types of education to a real variety of young people. And so we want to recognise that although we're putting forward, on the basis of this research, suggestions about how post-16 settings can support these young people, we recognise that a lot of practitioners are going to need to engage quite fully with that in order to tailor their approach to their own setting, and that's what we're calling on practitioners to do, and acknowledging that they face that challenge. Because despite this complexity and despite the variation, we believe that there is a real need to understand these young people, because there is a real appetite shown in the scoping research that was done by Michael Hall and shown in this research among practitioners to support these young people. Sometimes they feel like they're not getting the support, but the appetite is there, so we need to provide those answers and that guidance for practitioners to be able to enact them. I'll say a brief word about who the Centre for Education is, so you feel like you know who you're hearing from. We're a think and action tank, which basically means that we conduct research and we provide support, and we look to ensure that is highly practical, actionable, and has results. So we bridge the intersection between research, policy, and practice. We work with anybody across the education and youth sector, and central to our work is listening to young people. And our vision is to ensure that all young people are supported to make a fulfilling transition to adulthood. So we support our partners, such as the SCiP Alliance, in a range of ways, from providing research, creating tools, providing evaluation services, and supporting clients to make informed decisions about how they can work with young people. So, to dive in properly, I'd like to begin, perhaps a little bit unconventionally, by telling you a story. You can see the research that Ellie's teacher only coming out now. In spring this year, Anna and I conducted one of our first focus groups. We were up at FE College in the Midlands, and we, after building the tools, doing the initial lit review, were really excited to actually hear from young people. And we didn't really know, because there hasn't really been any research on this age group in this area, exactly what we were going to find. So, as we set up the room, the head of student services brings in three young people, and they sort of sit down with this mixture of suspicion and sullenness that adolescents will bring to a room, combined with this politeness because you're a new adult, and they're like, okay, I will talk to you. They didn't know very much what the research was about. Often the young people we speak to kind of arrive a bit like, why am I here, what am I doing? And as we explained for the consent procedures and to start the conversation, that we would be talking to them about their experiences in an armed forces family, you can see their sort of curiosity starts to come out. They sort of ask us, so we're going to tell you about, what my parents' job is like, and we sort of say, we're going to tell us about your experiences growing up and your experience in post-16 education. And you see this little bit of a transformation where they're like, oh, so you just want to talk about me? I'm going to tell you, okay. And they're, often a little bit reserved. But one young person, a young man, who introduced himself as Josh. He was 17 years old, and he sort of started to talk to us a little bit as we asked our first few questions. He told us that his father is in the army, he has 2 siblings, and he's moved around quite a lot as a child and been to a variety of different schools. He talks about how it's had an impact on some subjects. He describes it as a domino effect in his maths lessons, that he missed curriculum, joined a new school, they were doing a different topic, and he just didn't really feel like maths was his strong suit anymore, seeing as he'd missed all of these lessons. But generally, he says he enjoys his education. He's in post-16, he's studying a preferred subject. His father helped him access that course and helped him make the decision about what he was going to do at post-16. And he's coming towards the sort of end of his first year in post-16 and he's really enjoying it. We ask whether his father has ever been deployed. And he says that regularly throughout his childhood and still now he's deployed or weekends at various places across the country or abroad. We ask him how that is for him. And there's always a slight change in the conversation, the tone of the conversation, in a group of young people who sometimes don't even know each other, where you start to ask about something that they might have found a bit challenging. So he sort of explains that one of the main impacts it has is having extra responsibilities that he used to help out at home. He doesn't seem too negative about it, but he does say the words, "It just took a little bit of my childhood away." And some other young people agree with him. So Anna comes in and starts asking some questions about how he experiences his father's deployment now, when that's the case. And he rushes to describe a really big list of responsibilities that he takes on. And you can kind of see the pressure that he feels for those things. He talks about his mum not always being home, doing all of these chores, and really crucially, and we talked about this in a lot of detail, the contrast between when his father is at home, he takes him to college. It's quite a long journey. You know, a lot of people travel quite far for their post-16 education, and that's a quite crucial finding for us. And when his father is away, he really struggles to get the travel money together. He feels a lot more pressure to plan to get where he needs to be. But really, within this, there's not too much out of the norm. He's doing chores, on a 17-year-old on the cusp of adulthood, building responsibility, and generally, he seems okay. The other young people feel that partly this is a result of service life, but it has its benefits. So, as he speaks a little bit more about how he has found the impact of his father being away and the fact that he has these responsibilities, but that has benefits and drawbacks, he starts to talk a little bit more about the emotional impact of those pressures and about the fact that he actually misses his dad. Which is, of course, totally normal. He has a good relationship with his father. A lot of young people have parents whose job will take them away from home sometimes. But the specific point that he's making, where he feels like pressures are bearing down on him with the combination of that emotional impact, really came through from a lot of young people we spoke to. And I've told you Josh's story here today because it perfectly encapsulates the nuance of armed forces young people's lives. They take on some extra responsibility, but they're not intrinsically disadvantaged. They might have supportive parents, they might be engaged in their education, they might have moved around a bit during their school, and they might have felt during their schooling they might have felt the effect of that, but they may well be very engaged in a course that they feel is the right one for them by the time they get to post-16. However, where those pressures start to build up a little bit, if they feel like their setting does not understand that they might have a different home life to other young people, that's where you really start to get the issue of them feeling quite unsupported.
In another of our earlier focus groups, we arrived at a sixth form college. As Ellie said, this group of young people were half apprehensive, half silent as they walk in. And there was this one young woman, Amy, also 17, who started describing her father's experiences in the military with great pride. You could see how it just shone out of her. So through her questioning, and as the others in the group began sharing more of their own experiences, she started voicing that one reason why she thought her life was different from other non-armed forces young people is that she grew up without a sense of home. Like for her, it was really important that we understood that because she had moved around so many times, it was only in the last couple of years that her family had purchased a home, and it was this notion of having one house to call home was really important to her. So, and she was reflecting on how that impacted her understanding of just belonging to a place. In contrast, her experience late in secondary and starting college now was accompanied by a slowdown in mood. And she voiced that it was nice to count on the house as a home and also a more present father figure. The shift in the relationship meant some adjustments for her, because she explained that at the start there would be years where she would only have contact with him maybe 6 months total over maybe 3-4 years. And yeah, so she now that she was back in a place where they were more connected and more present in each other's lives, she had to find ways to build a relationship with her father. So I'm just going to give you a bit of time to read through that. So in Amy's experience, what she explained was that in some respects her father was someone she really looked up to, and the only topic of conversation that was common for them was her education. So as soon as he started becoming more of a present figure, she started to put that pressure on herself to do really well, impress him, etc. And it led to like mental health issues and some difficulties in school. But fortunately, she was in a much better place now. She got through her GCSEs and was receiving mental health support in the college that she was in. And as Amy explained some of her struggles she experienced in secondary school, she also reflected on what led to this situation. So aside from this relationship dynamic with her father, she also had a strong sense of independence and achievement, and that pressure that she built up meant that she was ignoring that she needed help and was struggling. And it wasn't until she started college when she was able to take a step back and realize that some of the difficulties she experienced were beyond her control. So it came across that she actually had a reading difficulty, and that was one of the reasons why she was struggling. She found herself struggling so much late in secondary school. So moving schools and uprooting her life was what she expected, and so she would not ask for help in school because there wasn't enough time for any support to be put in place. Fortunately, she found herself in a setting that actively sought to catch these difficulties, which led to her identifying her undiagnosed reading difficulty. And I brought this forward. It's a bit more on the critical side of the experiences that we found, but it encapsulates the overlap that being an armed forces young person can have with common life difficulties. So obviously armed forces young people can have different educational needs, as can other groups of young people, but here it was the fact of the frequent moves and her placing her independence and achievement on herself and the pressures that just compounded into this really difficult period in her life. So there we go. Thank you. So what we found actually is that young people experience factors and experiences related to service life. This can be mobility, deployment, living in a base, different experiences. However, these experiences give rise to some needs, and these needs can be experienced by some, not all, of the young people. So some of the young people will experience, for example, a missed curriculum, stress or anxiety. In addition to that, these life experiences also bring about some benefits. So they gain a stronger sense of independence, maybe they have like really strong links to their family, they experience different cultures, they learn how to adapt quickly, so those benefits come in as well. And some of the young people experience both, so they reap the benefits from these experiences, but they also kind of find themselves developing some of these needs. And then compounding onto that, once the young person has the needs, there are some structural barriers in education or just in the way of like how the data that we have, etc., that kind of compound onto the barriers and mean that those compound into the needs that mean that those needs go unmet or not fully met, and this is where we need more research. One could say that it could lead, like experiencing those barriers and having those needs unmet could lead to differential outcomes. So in that case, armed forces young people do not receive the support they need, and their needs are more likely to be unmet, so they experience differential outcomes. As I said, this is very initial stages, so we really think there's more research needed to especially tease out the later end of our model. Okay, so what are armed forces young people's experiences in post-16 education? As the title of our report suggests, the lived experiences we encountered were diverse, and they were embedded in complex systems. Ultimately, we recognize that the intrinsic effects of service life, or those experiences of service life, gave rise to those needs. For example, high mobility is an example of that. We explore these needs in the system in the first section, and then I'm going to address the barriers. Okay. So let's start with mobility. I'm going to explain some of these in detail, but not all. Okay. Let's start with mobility, as it's a central experience to most young people we spoke to. In the settings involved in our research, we found some evidence that the families had, where possible, made arrangements to limit mobility during the post-16 phase. Though it's not possible to conclude whether this is always the case, it's down to this case-by-case basis, really. And it is likely that some young people do move settings during this phase. Actually, we found 2 young people who had just recently changed settings halfway through their post-16 education. Nevertheless, we found that in terms of post-16 education, armed forces mobility mostly had its impact via earlier moves in the young person's educational journey. The impact of mobility includes mislearning, undiagnosed special educational needs, other unmet needs like disruptions to routine and culture shocks, and disengagement, as a result of having to repeat curriculum content. So I'm sure lots of you are very familiar with the idea of they move and they've done like that topic in a specific subject like 2 or 3 times at that point if they've moved frequently in the same 2 years or something. All these effects appear to have some impact on young people's post-16 experiences and also on young people's choices for their post-16 education. Another thing that we found is that the experience of independence and stress was one of our trickiest to navigate. We are aware that SCiP and other people have already discussed the difficulty associated with pinning down whether having increased resilience or increased independence is good or bad for a young person. However, we came to find that in some cases, having a strong sense of independence and duty, reinforced by the young people's context, their family, their own sense of self, ended up putting undue pressure on the young person. We recommend nuanced understanding that this relationship with having increased responsibilities or a stronger sense of independence was something that young people saw as a strength in themselves. But we found that it sometimes led to some emotional strain and especially particularly diminished support-seeking behavior. They put on themselves the label of I'm independent, I'm resilient, I can do this, and they are less likely to ask for support. In turn, obviously, this impacted their educational performance, their relationship to the post-16 settings, and especially their decision-making of post-16 and post-18 plans. It is not possible at this stage to establish whether there is a causal link between being an armed forces young person and having extra responsibilities or being more resilient and independent, but we did observe these rates, so there's at least a very strong correlation. Compounding with those needs, we found features in the education system. So these are the barriers that kind of mean that these needs go unmet, completely or to some extent. And these barriers represent that these needs don't go recognized or addressed. The central and most impactful one, as Phil said, is data and identification. I'm sure you're all aware that there are no national systems or processes for identifying the presence of armed forces young people in post-16 education. Many settings do not know who these young people are, nor are able to anticipate what their circumstances may be. So maybe they receive them and they know they're in a service family, but they don't have a systematic way of knowing how many, how disruptive was their education growing up, or how was their performance in school just before they started at this new setting. In England, the curtailment of the service people agreement means that where young people were previously identified and tracked, and so hopefully receiving support, once they move into post-16, they no longer are. So that support evidently drops. And in our practitioner survey, over half of responses hinted that settings do not collect this data, or practitioners are not aware that they do. So there's also a disconnect between what the settings do at an administrative level and what the practitioners are aware. This creates a huge gap in the information that settings have available on students, and it impacts directly the support that they can offer. Of course, being from an armed forces family is not synonymous with disadvantage. However, we did find that a key determinant of whether an armed forces young person was facing barriers in their education was socioeconomic disadvantage or the experience of poverty. Though this would be the case for other young people, certainly not in particular to armed forces families. Specific aspects of service life, so for example deployment, frequent moves, earnings based on rank, family size, property ownership, or return to civilian life can accentuate the impact of financial strain that different families experience. For example, we found that living on military salaries sometimes excluded young people from different options for financial support at the settings, which was primarily needed for travel when the parents were deployed. Existing research also highlights that mobility and deployment sometimes result in the non-military spouse finding it more difficult to work, and this was true in some of the young people's families. In some cases, the young people themselves were having to contribute financially to the family. In our practitioner survey, am I going too fast? No? Right. In our practitioner survey, we sought out to understand what practitioners knew and thought about armed forces young people. They tend to be quite invisible in post-16 settings. The understanding that practitioners may have about them can come from personal experiences or stereotypes. So we found that some of the practitioners were really acting on their imagination of what an armed forces young person was like, needed, etc. So we found that half to 3/4 of our respondents recognized that armed forces young people needed more support than other students, particularly in terms of emotional support. So it became clear that practitioners are aware that they do have needs, and for practitioners, the most crucial ones are learning support and especially emotional support. In turn, when we look at this graph relating to the barriers that practitioners face to providing support for armed forces young people in post-16 settings, we can see, one, that all barriers are experienced by practitioners, and two, that the top barriers is a lack of knowledge of their needs, followed by a lack of knowledge of how to support them, a lack of data to identify them, and a lack of staff time. These results support two central ideas. first, that we need to start by developing data and identification systems. So that is really the first point of action in order to provide the adequate support that they need. And second, there is a real need for more funding to allow for staff training or perhaps hopefully introducing a dedicated staff member to address these barriers on a more tailored level. I'm going to pass on to Ellie because she's going to be discussing about some findings that we had.
Great, thank you, Anna. So I'm going to sort of finish this up by talking about the recommendations, so what we found to be good practice in response to the needs and barriers that Anna has walked us through there. So we asked young people to sort of complete the sentence. If I could tell my teachers one thing about being an armed forces young person, I would tell them a slightly different activity to kind of elicit a little bit more about what support they want. And their responses focus on a desire for three things: flexibility, support, and understanding regarding deadlines and academic work, which I think is a little bit funny in some senses because I think some practitioners feel like, oh, they want flexible deadlines, sure, don't we all? But they were very specific about the fact that it was primarily during deployments or times when they had been moving around a lot that they felt that there was sort of like a lack of understanding of the things that they had going on at home. They were not, in fairness to all these young people, just like, yeah, there's deadlines that we just don't have to meet. The second one was to have support on offer without having to ask. Phil picked up on this in his introductory comments. We found a real trend where young people would talk to us about all the things that Anna has outlined, the difficulties that they were having, but they would say specifically that they felt there was an overtone in their setting and at school that being a service child and armed forces young person was not something that would warrant a need for support. And they sometimes were less likely to seek support, specifically if they felt they had a good sense of independence and duty and responsibility, which was compounded by that sort of military ethos. So they felt that the main solution to this was quite simply just that support was really explicitly on offer and that they didn't have to ask, can I get any support specifically for being an armed forces young person? And I think there were settings where there was support available. I mean, these practitioners had invited us in to speak to their young people, and then we did an interview with them when they told us about all the support they had available, but there'd be a couple of young people in the focus group that didn't really feel like there was anything on offer, so we disconnect that. And thirdly, greater visibility and understanding, the need to address misconceptions. So this young person wrote in their response, there are assumptions and stereotypes people make about army kids, that they'd experienced other pupils and even teachers saying really negative things, and that they wanted those to be addressed and practitioners to be more informed. So partially in response to some of this, we are, as an extension to this work, working with Aspire to HE, which is the Uni Connect partnership in the Black Country, Telford and the Wrekin, and a college there to run a pilot sort of intervention in response to the young people in our focus group there who specifically really wanted this greater visibility. So what we've done there is Aspire has come in and designed an intervention, a series of sessions for young people from armed forces backgrounds to design some training for staff. And the young people led it all themselves, and what they wanted to do, because they didn't want to present in front of staff because they felt that would be too intimidating, was to create a bit of video about armed forces life. And so through that, we've seen the real benefit of both young people participating in a project that they led, they gained a lot of skills from, but also the creation of a sustainable resource for that college to train their practitioners and just up that visibility a bit. So we're already sort of trying to demonstrate how listening to young people, taking their recommendations and trying different ways of working with them can have those real positive impacts. Shall I describe it? I'll put it all up there so we can go through. So, as we've alluded to a few times, we have the research report which is launched today. On the basis of that finding and at the basis of those findings, and as explored in the sort of final chapter of the research report, we are developing a best practice framework that extends the Thriving Lives toolkit, which is aimed at primary and secondary. Because of this complexity and diversity, which we talk about in the title, we feel that it's necessary to have a framework specific for the post-16 sector. it follows very closely the Thriving Lives toolkit. We want that consistency, especially in the case of sixth forms that are attached to schools. We feel that they will find that helpful. But we felt like there was that need for something specific to the sector. And it has a number of, sort of underlying contextual considerations that we present first, and then a set of principles I'll talk about in a second. So basically we invite practitioners who are engaging with the framework, which we are still in the process of developing and will launch hopefully later this year, with some feedback from you guys today ideally, to engage with the fact that the young people's needs are diverse. We've talked about that already, there's huge variation. We acknowledge that the post-16 sector is complex and the best people to understand their own settings when they design the support is the practitioners themselves. And from that, we think there are three major considerations. The central one being that student engagement should underpin all practice. Phil spoke to this a lot, so I'll try not to repeat too much, but essentially just saying to settings that if they feel a bit unsure about where to start by talking to young people. Start by doing this activity and find out where they would like you to go with your support. And secondly, a consideration of the universal support that they provide versus the targeted and tailored support they provide. Ideally, we'd like to see both, but what we mean here is like really central to our findings about how support is provided is that obviously a lot of post-16 settings provide a variety of support for all of their students that would be useful for armed forces young people. Catch-up support for those that maybe didn't pass their maths GCSE, for example, or mental health support for young people who feel that they're under stress. But sometimes there are barriers to young people from armed forces families accessing this. They don't feel that it is for them about their specific needs. So the first point we make is ensure that that universal support is available to those armed forces young people and they feel that they can access it, and families as well. The targeted and tailored support, as the title would suggest, is support that is provided specifically for armed forces young people. So it's a sense of looking at this support, ensuring that young people can access it, and then thinking, are the gaps in that support that mean we cannot fully meet armed forces young people's needs, and what are we going to provide that's targeted and tailored? And how are we going to provide that in a way that those young people don't feel sort of too pinpointed in the way that essentially teenagers sometimes don't like. So these contextual considerations are really key to anybody beginning to engage with the framework. From then on, we have seven best practice principles, just as the Thriving Lives toolkit for school level does. And within the toolkit, we are looking to, first of all, provide the evidence and why that should be a best practice principle, plus a series of recommendations about what an individual setting can consider as they start to think about each aspect of this practice. I'm just going to read through them all. So, of course, our recommendation to practitioners is to engage with the framework, to feed back to us, to provide that support. But from the research, we've also made two central policy recommendations that we would really like to see taken forward, because fundamentally, unless we're able to address these two things, I think any practitioner engaging with the framework and trying really hard to provide that support is going to basically not be able to fully realise that, and is going to face a series of barriers along the way. You're going to have situations where one practitioner puts something in place from the framework, but there isn't that sustainability. Of course, those recommendations are data and funding. Anna's spoken about essentially nobody knows where a lot of these young people are, who they are, and then settings are often not aware of them. So we're calling, first of all, on governments to create better systems for recording the presence of armed forces students. Ideally, this would be something where the English, Scottish and Welsh systems can speak to each other. I realise that there are challenges to that, and essentially we put forward a stage recommendation for ideally this across all three nations. If not that, then ideally on a nationwide level and some ability for them to speak to each other. And if not that, or in the meantime, on a setting and sort of setting system level. Settings can start collecting this data. And we actually heard from a lot of settings that couldn't connect us with young people last academic year, that they were looking to do so in September. So there is perhaps a growing awareness of that. And hopefully we've contributed to that, because I think some practitioners are like, oh, we don't know where these young people are. And secondly, funding. As Anna mentioned, the service people premium in England stops at year 11, but we've just written a 70-page report and spent 9 months finding out their needs just continue. I don't think anyone's surprised. but apparently the funding just doesn't match up. So we are calling on the DfE in England to extend that funding to post-16. In Scotland and in Wales, the system works slightly differently, so we've adjusted that recommendation to say that the funding provided to SSE Cymru should be extended to allow them to work with young people in post-16 in more depth. And in Scotland, I know there's like a really complex variety of funding pots, and Carly, who's going to be on our panel, I'm sure could speak to that if people are interested, but there isn't quite as much acknowledgement as there could be that post-16 needs support. I think they perhaps have a slightly more flexible funding system that could respond more quickly than England's could to ensuring that funding is there. But while we make these recommendations with some nuance, some sort of angle about how it could be done, I think the central point is probably quite clear that practitioners can only do so much in a stretched sector without funding to actually put in place this support. So that's all from us. I hope that was useful to hear in detail about all of our findings. I hope you'll still engage with the report because we left some stuff out just to keep the interest there. We'd be very happy to have a very quick time check. Literally so on time. We'd really happy to take some questions if there are any before we have just a quick break, and then we'll move on to hearing from our wonderful panelists. So I want to get a little bit of responsive feedback from you guys. That's what the postcard's for, so I'll leave that, and then we'll have one. So thank you so much.
Can we go to about 20 past?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll wait.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you very much as well for engaging so energetically already through the questions. That's really evident. It's a subject that not only is a passion for many people, but also a really important one for us to collectively address. And thank you hugely to the panel who've agreed to come and share their experiences from a range of different perspectives. One of the things the Alliance is for is gathering that diverse range of perspectives and helping, as has been said before, to slap some simplicity on the complexity that we're all trying to deal with. So I'm going to invite each of the panel members just to introduce themselves, say who they are and where they're from, but also just to share briefly, just a couple of minutes as well if you can, on what's your interest in coming to this in terms of the education of service children in the post-16 sector. So over to you, Rania, first.
Hi everyone, my name is Rania and I work for the Enable From Inspiration as their marketing manager, and I'm also a military child myself, and my mum is currently still serving in the Royal Navy as a petty officer, so I'm just here today to offer you my experience growing up in there, and yeah.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Carly Elliott. I am the Deputy CEO and Policy Lead at Forces Children Scotland. We are obviously a Scottish third sector organisation that works with Forces children that are specifically based in Scotland. That said, the origin of the charity actually begins here in London in 1815 when we were set up as a school and accommodation for children who lost their parents in the Napoleonic War. Jump forward a number of years, we're quite different now. We offer mental health and wellbeing support to Forces children in some school settings in Scotland. We provide financial grants to struggling service families. We provide participation opportunities for Forces children to influence policy, law and practice. And we also provide training and education opportunities for public authorities, but largely educators. So it probably will not be surprising that education is probably one of our main strategic focuses as an organisation. And in terms of the research, I guess everything stood out as being relevant and reflective of what we hear. I think the biggest thing for me was the practitioner reflections and that kind of dichotomy of, yes, this is clearly something that we need to do something about and a real appetite to do it, but then also that challenge with balancing with other community groups, other groups of children who have priority need, and how do we do that in a way that is resourced and fair and takes everybody's intersection needs into consideration as well.
Thanks very much, Carly. Russell.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Russell Collier. I'm from the Ministry of Defence. I head up the education policy team within the Armed Forces, Families and Safeguarding team within the MOD. Why am I here? It's my job, simply. Our team is, whilst we do hold policies within the MOD ourselves as a team, Our role is to advocate for service children in educational matters, not just within the UK, but across the whole of the globe. So that can, so in terms of stakeholders, we work very closely, obviously, within the MOD themselves, and with the services themselves and the local commands. But we also work with other government departments, with the devolved administrations, but we also delve into the worlds of local authorities, the higher education elements. There's obviously lots of faces here I recognise today. But again, going into things sort of Boarding Schools Association, UCAS, you name it, we will get involved if there is a way in which we can, I wouldn't say influence, but try and make people aware of some of the challenges that some service children may face during their educational journey. We have, as a team, have been heavily involved with SCiP from the very beginning. We were there when those initial conversations, when it was set up, and we are again still very strong supporters of SCiP and everything that SCiP does and all the support. And as an alliance, their ability to bring an alliance together, we're very positive about that. And I remember very early on in meeting with Phil, that saying to me, there are gaps in our knowledge. There are gaps in our knowledge, and one of those key areas gaps for me was that post 16 to 19 gap. And therefore, we're really, really pleased that this piece of work has been produced. I think the title sums it up perfectly: diversity and complexity. And I'm also very pleased with the fact that the balance it has within the actual piece of research. So it's not starting off from a deficit model in terms of service children. It seems to get the balance of the opportunities and the challenges that they may face. So no, I'm pleased with what I've seen so far.
Thank you, Russell. Delighted as well that even in the site of Ofsted, not far off, we've got a college engaging with us.
Hi everyone, my name's Catherine Townend. I'm from Barton Pebble Sixth Form College, which is in Eastleigh. We're a very large sixth form college of over 4,700 students, and my role is student progress advisor, and within my role I have responsibility for supporting service member students, as we call them, or armed forces young people, as they're called in the report. My interest is sort of multifaceted. My partner's in the military. My previous manager, who is now the deputy principal, her husband is in the military. He was in two forces. He's currently in the army, but was in the navy before that. And my current manager, for the last 2.5 months, she herself was a service family student, so she's got direct experience. I also have had similar experiences in childhood, not being a military old armed forces child, but my parents were in the Foreign Office, so I moved around a lot until I went to boarding school. So we're very, very committed to supporting our students, and currently we have got 50 students, which is, in the grand scheme of things, a very small percentage, but the commitment is there. And previous academic years, I've only been doing this for 2 years, and there's been 30 odd. So as we've grown each year, so have the numbers, and we are very interested in, obviously, the report. We are trying different things each year. For me, as I was saying earlier, what was very surprising, but also not surprising, however, was the report revealed such inconsistency in the post-16 landscape. So it's imperative that this is addressed and that consistency is developed. And again, at a national level, ideally in the first instance, but it starts with settings and then building up. So in order to ensure some good practice, it's got to be done thoroughly with firm foundations. So that's me in a nutshell and my interest.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you.
We've got some time now then to start essentially the discussion collectively. Like I said, that's what the Alliance is about. And we have a range of really invaluable experiences and perspectives here. So we've been asking ourselves the question, what do you feel is the key message or the takeaway of the report? So if you'll have a reflect for yourself in terms of what strikes you, that might be a useful prompt for any questions you want to ask. But also, I want us to consider both what are the changes that we think are going to make the difference at a policy level, but also in terms of practice. So I want to make time to do both of those things. One thing we have in the room is a great diversity of backgrounds. We've got researchers who've got experience in this field. We've got people who are running programs that are trying to reach out to young people. We've got others who are in charities that are supporting families. Each of those perspectives has something valuable to offer. in both what needs to change in terms of policy, whether that be at that macro level I was talking about, or at local levels as well, or indeed practice. So just please have a think about what would help you if you were going to leave today with something you were going to do. Often I end conferences by asking people, what will you do in 5 minutes tomorrow to make a first step? If you started to reflect on that, what's the question you need answered in order to do that? Is there something you need to understand, something you want to get off your chest? So I'm just going to pose that openly to you. What are the main changes you want to see in terms of policy and practice? But I'll put that to the panel first, if anybody wants to chip in on either or both of those. What are the things that jump out for you that you think are the key changes we want to see in terms of policy or in terms of practice? Is anybody keen to start on that? Catherine, yeah.
I came to the same conclusion as I was reading through the report. Two things that jumped out were funding at the moment, ideally, with all the pressures, but funding is crucial, and also the data, because not having the data, students can't be identified, can't be supported sufficiently, and then it becomes again sort of inconsistent, a bit ad hoc. So it's really important that through the post-16 landscape, with various sort of sixth forms or FE colleges, training providers, that a consistent approach is developed, and then across the nations, as we were talking about. So that can then drive forward the support that's provided, whether they want to have it at that moment or not. It's got to be there for them, and they've got to be made aware of it. So.
Thanks for that. The report makes some really good, useful points actually about the fact that data, there are things that you can do at a local level. There are things we want to do. The major recommendations are about how we need to change nationally. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you're approaching that as an institution in terms of data. You're obviously doing a lot with young people. It'd be good to share your practice.
At Barton Pebble, what we do is when students apply on the application form, we have one of the questions that, are you from a service family? And then at interview, they're designated to me, so I interview as well. And so I can interview, and then I ask about their experience, is the parent or carer or both from Army, Navy, Air Force, and find out whether they've been, it tends to be, I don't want to stereotype or generalise, but Army and RAF tend to move around more, whereas Navy students tend to be more local, and it's the parent who gets deployed. We do have quite a few Navy students in our cohort, but we do have increasingly other students from RAF or Army background. So they're interviewed by me, then all things going well, they enrol, and at enrolment the question is asked again, and the enrollers are all taught you must ask a series of questions, but they must check this. I've also previously asked, and I've had conversations again with the relevant colleague about differentiating at that point, are they from Army, Navy, Air Force? So that is going to be implemented in this upcoming summer's enrolment cycle. And then once they're at college, they're all designated with a symbol, so they become one of our Access Plus students. We have a programme where Access Plus is an umbrella term, so you could be from an armed forces family, you could be sort of care experienced, you might experience disadvantage in terms of socioeconomic disadvantage, but they're all identified, and through the programme tutors, teachers, the student progress advisor, so that's like a head of year, it's our jargon, but that's like me, that's like a head of year. Anyone who looks at that student's profile will see that they're from an armed forces family, and in the tutor sessions, what the tutor will do is have a conversation, not just a usual one-to-one which they have with everyone. They will also complete what we call an Access Plus form, so we can identify is there any need, is there any sort of financial need, do they have the resources they need, so sort of meet, in terms of that report, if the family income wouldn't qualify them for the financial support, they might still be able to qualify for resources support, so they might just be just over, but they could still borrow laptops, that sort of thing. So throughout college they're tracked, I monitor them. When they leave, they're tracked. We've got a couple of years of destinations reports, and my manager and I were looking at that closely. And if they haven't reported, in October we have a team of staff who then follow up any students that we don't know to find out. Now, sometimes in the best one in the world we still can't find out, and then the student becomes not known, unfortunately. But we'll do everything we can to track throughout, from the beginning of the journey, throughout, and also prior to students starting. We have liaison with schools, and they will tell us this student is a service family student. So sort of every every part of their journey. We track them, and we're improving that more. So we're not perfect. We need to keep improving, but we can sort of track them through that, and then obviously there's the personal support as well, of course.
I think cue size of awe and wonder across the room.
You know, it wasn't really something I thought about because it wasn't really brought up to me that it's something that I kind of was more needed sort of the support with. It's just kind of this sort of independence. You kind of just get on with it because that's probably what you're sort of used to. So I think it is really useful, and it's actually really useful to know because my sister as well, she's trying to apply for Bath and Pebble, so...
You're joking.
I
wasn't saying. I'll get your name.
So yeah, it's really quite reassuring to know that there will be someone there that is going to sort of check up on the aspect for her, and she's going to get that support that she needs for her education. Especially, you know, as my mum, she's still active and she does deploy and go away for like long periods of times and stuff like that, especially when she's doing courses as well. So it is going to be really useful to sort of have that, and I'm actually quite happy hearing that. And I was like, oh, that's really good because yeah, she's really looking forward to it, and she did go to the open evening and she did enjoy it. So yeah, so it's really reassuring to actually know that there is actually work being done to identify like us, and that people actually sort of care about that kind of aspect, because I think you don't, like I said earlier, you don't really think about it and you just kind of think no one else really knows or understands, or they don't, it's not really something that pops in your head, so it's really good that that sort of thing to yeah, bring that up. And, yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. Really good to hear.
Yes.
I have to facilitate the connection.
Thank you.
Carly, what about you? You the practice all the policy piece, you know, what are the changes you want to see?
Yeah, so apologies, mine will be entirely focused on Scotland. That may or may not be interesting to most people in this room. And probably before I continue your data song, it's probably helpful to give a little bit of some Scottish policy context where we're at just now. Personally, I think that in Scotland we have quite a progressive children's rights landscape emerging in Scotland, particularly around some policy areas. The most notable of which is the hopeful, fingers crossed, incorporation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Over the years, I've been part of a lot of the kind of influencing around the future incorporation of that bill. And it's really interesting that the approach of kind of civil society organisations in Scotland has been to identify those kind of lesser heard voices and those groups that need to be considered very specifically. I'm thinking about what Ellie said earlier about the kind of universal support versus recognising the tailored and targeted support and the importance of that balance. But a really notable absence has been the voice of Forces Children within that, and I think we're now at a point where Scotland's really progressing quite interestingly around children's rights, at least at a policy level, not necessarily implementation-wise yet. But Forces Children seem to be quite missed from those discussions, and that's obviously something we would want to change. I think, though, that is incredibly hard to do when there is no data, or there is a kind of lack of, especially Scottish-based or really meaningfully Scottish-based research that evidences what needs to happen and why we should consider this population specifically. And it also creates challenge where across all different policy areas in the Scottish Government. So I'm thinking specifically about the Education Additional Support for Learning Act in Scotland, whereby Forces Children are considered worthy of extra support when they're in school. The reality is that that doesn't often happen. It actually doesn't happen for many of the groups that are included within that legislation. Care experienced children in a similar situation. But even when you try to influence improvement around existing legislation and policy, it's really hard to do without a kind of backing of data and research to evidence why you need to improve it or how we can go about improving it. So pieces of research like this are really helpful for us. And just lastly, I guess also, I said this at the table earlier, so I'm just going to repeat myself. When there isn't existing data or research that you can nod to or use in your arguments, for civil society organisations like ourselves who exist to advocate for a better life for the community that we represent, it can be hard to stay in that positive space where we don't talk about disadvantage and the negative experience, because sometimes you have to rely on anecdotal stories and lived experience of individual young people to convince people, to compel people to make the changes that need to happen. We don't want to do that because that's stigmatising in itself, but when there isn't existing research, that's quite a hard thing to do. So more of this would be brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carly. Russell.
Thanks, Phil. Big takeaways from me are, again, ones we would have all thought about before. Some of the issues that some service children face don't just magically disappear once they finish Key Stage 4 at the age of 16. I think some of the challenges we face are, as have been alluded to already, in some ways it doesn't matter what sort of framework you put in place or what sort of support mechanism you put in place. Having said that, what's going on at Barton Peveril sounds really positive, so that's a huge plus to hear about from my perspective. If you can't identify the children in the first place, then how can you convince the seconds order practitioners to actually provide that support? That's one of the challenges that's faced. And one of the challenges we face and other people face is, whilst defence is across the whole UK, education's devolved. So you're dealing with different governments or different administrations which quite naturally have different ways of doing things. There's no right way or wrong way, they're just different. And trying to align those, or trying to look for these administrations to align ways of doing things, it is challenging and often, in some ways, not the right thing to be trying to do. So, yeah, there are undoubtedly challenges ahead. If we know where the children are, that's fine. Another challenge for the education sector, also being ex-educationist myself, is there are a huge amount of pressures already that the education sector is facing on many, many levels. So whatever is provided for institutions to support service children of this age group, it's got to be something that they can actually just pick off the shelf and work with. If we're asking people to use in some of these settings, their valuable time and associated financial resources with delivering that is going to create additional challenge for the school settings, college settings as well. That's very, very clear. But is this a piece of work that's going to help? Yes, undoubtedly. It's as has already been mentioned by Carly. Often you're working on your own stories you picked up, or anecdotal evidence, or again your own professional opinion, which is fine. But again, to have a growing level of research which you can throw on the table and back up an argument or an approach you want to take, that can only be a positive thing. So, do I think this is going to help? Yes. Are there challenges? Yes. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to address those challenges.
Thanks, Russell. Let's find out what everybody else thinks. You might have questions to put to the panel or just to throw out to the floor. If you just put your hands up, I'll collect a couple of questions perhaps at a time to give people opportunity to think about that. And I'll take those in order. So we're going to hear, if you just introduce yourself so other people know who you are, and then keep your question brief. Thank you, Jen.
I'm Jodie. I work at the University of Portsmouth, but also we lead the South Hub of the SCiP Alliance. So my question is definitely going to be Barton Peveril. We really struggle with engaging colleges, mainly because we don't really know who to speak to, and people we have spoken to are the wrong people. So have you found that other colleges are looking to similar things, or similar people in your role? Is it people in your role that we need to approach, or is it different depending on what provider you go to?
Let's just hold, sorry, I'm just going to take a couple, so you've got a few people who have a think about it. I'm sure we'll have some great answers, we'll get to those, but just here, we'll take another question as well.
Hi, my name's Clint. I'm from a slightly different background to everybody else. I'm the person who's talking about with my children. So my question would be, for me is how do we spread this awareness and how do we get people involved? Knowing the process my daughter's just gone through, nobody's asking questions, there's no other service people in the college. She's now, how do we get that word out there?
Thank you, that's really good to hear about the service family themselves have a massive stake in this, and there are some stakeholders in the room who could support with that. And there was just one other question over here, I think, Matthew.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Thorne, I'm the assistant head at SCiP College. I think it must be Hampshire that does really good tracking, because I used to work at the SCiP College in Farnborough, and I know they track their data for service children really well. But I've spoken to lots of colleges, and lots of colleges' queries are, why is it going to help us to track that data?
Okay.
So I think that's one of the things we need to think about, how we're getting that message across, how it can work for colleges, because they turn around and say, why do you do it? Why would I want to do that?
That's really helpful. Okay, good. So you've had a chance to think about those, you know what's coming your way. Catherine, you obviously a question directly to you about who to speak to in the college in order to build the engagement that people are trying to.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would just recommend contacting the college that you're interested in, obviously you know me now, and ask to speak to the member of staff who is responsible for supporting the service family students or armed forces young people, because I get queries that way, whether it's from stakeholders or parents, guardians, that come through our reception, and then they automatically triage, and it might be that it's someone in the senior leadership team, but the only way to find out really is to ask. I don't know about practice in other colleges, but that's how I receive, and we also we advertise it as well, so when students are interested in coming to college, we'll advertise this through talking to them, open evenings, that sort of thing, as I said, and through our application system. But again, it's not no one size fits all, and that's the whole problem. Sort of
I tricky point, when we've been contacting them, the people that we have been in touch with don't know who is responsible within their own setting.
Oh, that's right.
So
okay.
we're obviously just not reaching the people that we need to reach.
Yeah.
So.
Let's join a couple of things here together, because we've got another question as well, which is about how do you engage a college per se, which is your point, I think, Matthew, isn't it? What's the message that's going to get them to say, oh, actually, we should collect data, we should care about that? And I guess if you can get your head outside of Barton Peveril, where things are taken seriously, loads of colleges we're hearing don't have a person who is responsible for this because they've never been identified. Have you got any thoughts about how would you approach a college to say you should engage with this, you should collect data, and this is the person I should start talking to if they're doing, say, nothing?
Well, my question back to them, well, why would you not collect data?
Why is it obvious to you that you should collect data?
Because if you can identify those students, whether they want support or not, and I have sent out emails and sent out offers of come and join the Service Family Student Society, just started up, and it kind of goes into nothingness most of the time, but even if one or two or three come back to me, and I always say to them, it's not about forcing, it's optional, but you need to know it's there. So if you want the support, again, I guess it ties in with the report, as you were saying, that the support is there, you don't have to ask for it, you know it's already there. But I mean, it's why would colleges think it's important to track care experienced students and then not service family students? I mean, if you these sorts of reports, I think, providing evidence, it comes back to that evidence, providing that evidence base to them, and this would be obviously a big job, but showing that the reason that is because, especially I think if maybe there's the longitudinal data is at some point available, there is the evidence of support has led to this more positive outcome where students have not been supported, they've maybe not reached their potential. And also it isn't much effort either. It doesn't take much effort to just add on a form that tick on the box and for an interviewer to clarify, are you from a service? Sometimes they get muddled, they think it's a different service, but it's that way at least there's minimal effort. Now, other parts, yes, there is more effort, you do need to have more time and that sort of thing, but through minimal effort they can then support that cohort of society, like the gentleman's children, who otherwise could be unnecessarily struggling, and it's really important that we allow all students, whatever their circumstances, to flourish.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. And I think it probably ties in really neatly to another question we've had, I think was it Clint from here, which is about how we're going to grow awareness, because it seems like you're right, the research is one of the solutions is that there's evidence that there is the potential for people to not achieve, to have mental health and well-being challenges that prevent them to engage. So we've got some evidence. Perhaps Russell, Rania, Carly, what about this other point here? There's some general messages about how we're going to build engagement, because that seems like the first point, and the same is true from Clint's point. How do we build engagement with the service families and with the military side in order to be able to change practice, change awareness, and get people starting to do something? Who wants to start on that? Either of those features about building engagement with the sector or with families? Russell,
I can go with that if you want. In terms of engaging with the sector and the families, for us, there are different routes. Obviously, engaging with the SCiP Alliance themselves, and using some of our stakeholders that have sometimes a more direct engagement with the families, like the family federations. They're all here today. There we go. We follow each other around the country mainly. But no, so working with those organisations is key to that engagement for us. And I think what we've got there in terms of that dissemination. It's working out what level to go in with the dissemination, whether you're looking at a national level, whether you're looking at a local authority level, whether you're looking at a family level, that's where it becomes challenging. Often we've found in the past you have to do them all just to try and cover bases. The problem also, you can disseminate material to your heart's content, but it doesn't mean people are going to actually pick it up or open the email or actually do something with it. So that's also a challenge. It's trying to make, and I think this leads into Matt's question about, okay, colleges saying, well, why should we do this? I agree. As an educator, your initial reaction is, well, what the hell wouldn't you want to do this? If you're trying to help children achieve their full potential, or students achieve their full potential, why wouldn't we want to do this? But I suppose that comes back to, again, links back nicely into the dissemination. It's that raising the awareness. It's actually trying to make people aware of what the challenges are, be it through training materials or just through dissemination of information, to make people aware of what the challenges this particular niche group of children often can face. So I think in terms of sorry, yes, I know I talk too much, sorry.
Sorry, Russell, thank you. I want to make sure there's time just for Carly and Rani to respond as well, and we've got a couple more questions waiting.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think this has kind of already been said, I'm probably repeating, but I think that whole question about how to get practitioners or colleges understanding why, I think when we look at that spreading awareness and kind of galvanising support for why it needs to look at both the community, like you were saying as well, and the professionals. And I think we can look to other community groups to learn from how that's happened elsewhere. So in Scotland there has been, I know this is happening in England right now as well, but we've had a real focus on the care experience population in Scotland. We came out with an independent care review with a number of policy solutions. Again, I will not say necessarily if they are implementing well or not. But one of the things that came up a lot over that period of time was about trackers, the Student Awards Agency for Scotland, schools, whoever it might be, being able to identify yourself as a care experienced student. And a lot of what our young people in the organisation I used to work for said was that they didn't want to identify themselves as being part of that community, either because they felt it was stigmatising or because they were scared about what it would mean for them. So I think we need to make sure that we help forces children and their families to understand what the benefit is for them to identify their status and their experience, what benefits you get from it, what additional support, that it's not about keeping an eye on you, because again that's how people can interpret, particularly I think young people can interpret it as that. So framing it really positively and with a kind of affirmative approach around this is what we want to be able to offer you to help you. So probably a two-pronged approach where it focuses on the families, the children, as well as the professionals.
Really, really good advice, thank you. What about your experience, Ron? What would make a difference in terms of you wanting to be identified and to engage? And then as a family, you know, Clint's point about why would you engage? What would convince you?
I think it's just why I want to engage is because, especially if you are facing a lot of pressures at home due to your service life, and you kind of feel like you have no one to go, it can be a struggle. So I think I think someone said just knowing that it is there for you, just being aware that it's there, because a lot of the time you don't really know if something is there or not, or if it's relatively new. I feel like it's not really like sort of pushed or advertised, especially like even like going into uni. Like if there are sort of events going on, it can be sometimes really hard to actually know like if it's actually there, or even going through college is actually kind of hard sometimes to know it's there. So even like, you know, yeah, like if someone pushes out an email to say that it's there, the support is there if you need it, it can help. And I think it provides a bit of sort of like a little bit of confidentiality, because it's not like everyone knows, like if you're not comfortable with, you know, being sort of out there as a surface family, it kind of helps you to actually kind of do that in your own sort of space. But also I think there is a benefit of pushing a positive message about it, because like I know there are some people who feel a bit stigmatized about being a surface family, or they don't really feel comfortable perhaps sort of identifying with that part of their life. So I think just having someone kind of I think the reassurance is really important. Just having them to know that it's not something you should be embarrassed about, or you should hide, or feel like you should keep to yourself. I think, you know, so if someone's there, you can kind of reach out a hand to. I think that's the most important thing to people. And just even like having someone there at like family events and things for service families could be useful, especially if there are young adults like 16 to 19, they're going with their families, they're going to be there. I think they should be recognised, because sometimes I think even at some of these events, they're not really sort of catered to sometimes. They're not really the main focus, and I think just having someone there to actually focus on them a little bit more, and just be someone to be there to ask questions to, or someone to engage and be like, oh hi, like, you know, blah blah blah, like, you know, sort of thing. Sorry. It can be just useful to have that person to talk to as well. Just someone to just approach you, and you know that it is there, and you know, like someone is there for you. I think that's just the most important thing. Yeah.
Great. So we've had some really good answers there that say a comprehensive approach. A comprehensive approach is right. There's the opportunity to approach people individually. Yeah. But it comes out in the report that part of the culture that needs to be created is one of celebration. It's not about deficit, but perhaps that part of the message is that we're not saying here there's a problem with armed forces children. We're saying we value the contribution that armed forces families make. It presents challenges to you, and we want to help you when you need it. So, I mean, there are some approaches there. And why the framework, I think, is a really lovely starting point, which we're looking to build on. We've got a couple of questions I know about. Emily first, I think, and then Ross, and then anybody else? That might be all we've got time for. Jan, yes. We'll take all three and see what we can do.
Hi, I'm Emily Dixon from London Higher. Something that I found really interesting in the report and also in the research presentation was the material about what the young people wish schools and colleges knew, or what they wish they could tell the schools and colleges. From more of a university and a higher education recruitment perspective, I was wondering if the panel members had any thoughts on if you could make universities know one thing about working with this group, what would you want them to know?
A really good question, thank you. So lots of people think about that. One thing that you would want them to know, universities. Ross.
Hi, Ross Hall. I'm an academic, don't hold that against me, but also a practitioner psychologist, but I'm also a veteran. So, and I do a number of things to SCiP. So I think, for me, the piece that's missing is the educational outcomes. So what marks do they get, what grades do they get in relation to their social background, so it all hinges on firstly identifying who they are and then tracking them throughout the course of their educational life course. And I don't think there's anything out there that does, even in part.
Thank you. Perhaps there's a question.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, but it implies a question as to where is the action that's happening to do that? Perhaps at a college's level, but also nationally. We'll come to that, and then I think Jan.
Thank you, Phil. It's a comment more than anything else. I'm Jan Walker, and I was involved in the MOD Living in Our Shoes work, so come with quite a lot of knowledge, along with Gabriella, of talking to military families. It's a comment really to pick up on what Carly said and then was picked up by Rania. One of the challenges, I think, for the future is going to be the number of military children who are dispersed away from bases. And increase, please don't turn up at school in uniform, because it frightens the children. So I think one of the challenges and one of the research things that needs to look at is specifically children and young people who are not living near any kind of military structure, base, wherever. and there may be one or two in a school, maybe only one in a school. And so not like yours where you've got a number where it's okay to have that group. And I would just say be very careful about how you kind of spread the messages. I think it's a societal thing as well as a culture, but there needs to be more thinking about how the messages get to schools and so on.
Yeah, really kind of you, thank you. So, panel, your challenge, you get 50 seconds, I've calculated each. And we've got a question about what one thing would you want universities and higher education providers to know that would make a difference in them beginning a journey in this regard. A comment about the challenges of the longitudinal outcomes and what might be done there, as well as perhaps this tidal wave unknown future around the effects that are going to come from increased dispersal of service children as the future accommodation model takes to bite. So pick one, form your 45 seconds now each. Who wants to go first?
I was just going to answer your question.
Thanks, Catherine.
Just very quickly thinking, for universities, it goes back to this independence, because just because students present as being very independent, and that is the next stage after sixth form and FE, etc. Don't assume that that's going to be the case the whole time, and make sure that they're aware through their tutors, through the health and wellbeing services at universities, that they touch base with them. And again, it's not pinpointing, but it's making sure they're aware, because they are more likely to maybe sort of hold it all in and then maybe come to crisis point, and that could be avoided sooner, I'd say.
Thanks, Catherine. Russell, let's go down the line.
Right, it's going to be trouble. So Emily, yes, I think I would say engage with SCiP. We have, with SCiP in the past, engaged directly with all higher education institutions. We wrote to them a couple of years ago, and we were trying to do recently, but there seemed to be lots of ministerial changes going on, which made it difficult. But you would, I don't know the figures, Kath, you might have it all filled, but the engagement from higher education institutions has increased remarkably over the course of the last few years. Ross, completely agree with you in terms of that educational data. If people look at the Armed Forces Covenant Fund report, annual report each year, there is some DFE data there. I appreciate it's DFE, so England only. DFE data about aggression, engagement in higher education, service children against non-preschool meals, non-service children. There is a little bit of data there, but sometimes high-level data, you've got to dig down, that's the problem. I agree. And Jan, yes, completely agree. And it's one of the areas of interest for us at the moment. And actually in relation to the service pupil premium, how could we help schools make more effective use of service pupil premium if they've just got £320, for example? It's a really good point.
Good. I could use a toolkit. I think there's a toolkit out there somewhere. I'm pretty sure could help you. Thank you. Go on, Carly.
I feel the pressure of the time limit now. The data collection and tracking point I think is really huge. In Scotland we've had some discussions recently about replicating how we track data for other groups. Again, care experience, clearly that's where my background is in. But I think collecting the right data in the right way is also really important, so not to make it sound more complicated than it already is. But a lot of the national data sets that we collect in Scotland are captured on 1 day, I can't remember what the word is for that, like snapshot 1 day. Yeah, and therefore don't necessarily present actually a really helpful picture, or they talk about positive destinations post-school, and actually it doesn't genuinely track beyond the point where we know people would tend to fall out of university or college. So I think, again, learning from how it's not necessarily worked elsewhere would be really important. And I just wanted to say, is it Jan?
Yes.
It's great to not great to hear, it's awful to hear, but that reflects what we've heard, and I had actually wondered if that was quite a uniquely Scottish perspective, but clearly it's not. I think there's a little bit of an identity issue around the military that we have to consider before we think about reaching families. So I just thank you, because that reflects what we hear as well.
Thank you.
I think what they said.
Thank you. Rani, last word to you.
I think one thing universities should know about armed forces young people It's just a decision-making aspect as well as when going there of, why they particularly want to go to that university, whether it's actually close to home because they have responsibilities as parents, deploy or they move, or whether it's far away and how actually they can support them if they are further away from home, and if there is certain emergencies that they need to be back home for, they need to sort of consider that sort of support there, because I think that's something a lot of people might not think about. It's just the sort of distance, and when it comes to moving around and things like that, it can get difficult, and it can increase sort of pressure, and then it comes to withdrawal, and a lot of sort of mental health issues might come from that as well, that can impact their education essentially. So I think that's something they should also consider. And about the sort of stigmatization, I guess, I think that is something I have actually seen, like especially when thinking back to secondary school. My mum came in her uniform, you do get a lot of stares and things like that, and I don't think they were particularly bad in any sort of way, but it can be, I can imagine what it is like to sort of be picked out as that, because in my school I don't think there was a lot of armed forces kids there. I think I was the only one, so having that sometimes it can be a bit like, it can make you feel a bit, you don't want to stand out too much, so it might freely from asking for help, but I think that's something we should sort of normalise, that even if there isn't a person there, it's still needed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for your engagement, and to our panel. Let's just say thanks to them, shall we?
Thank you so much, all. That was an incredibly interesting discussion. Also, thank you for your really engaged and thoughtful post-16. So if perhaps Ashley and Owen want to see some of that and join in the conversation, there are other people that have not made it here today that are keen to talk about the report's findings. So I thought I'd mention that. I also, because this is another point that I'll forget, wanted to mention, of course, there's reports on the table. Please take away the one that was at your seat. We've got some extras by the door. If you've got colleagues that you feel would be interested in reading the report, please take an extra copy. We didn't print them just so that they can look pretty on our shelves at home. I did steal one, but it's so that people read the research. So I just thought about that and wanted to let you know. Before we move to lunch, which is coming shortly, and I know it's everybody's very important moment, I realise you've been listening for a really long time, and again, thank you for your engagement in that. But we, as we've spoken about today, are at the point of having done this research and sharing the findings. Our toolkit, extending for Anamaria's toolkit into post-16 is in development. And we want this to be a sort of starting point, not the end of what we're doing. So I'm going to ask you both to start to build a network amongst yourselves and to share where you think you might be able to support the SCiP Alliance and CfEY in taking the research forward. I was originally going to sort of workshop this, ask you some questions, discuss feedback, but I feel like we might have been a little bit too close to lunch for that. So instead what I've decided to do, I've just got some questions to essentially stimulate your conversations on your tables. And what I'd like you to do is perhaps share any of your own experiences working with this group with each other. Whether you think we've missed anything, I'd be really keen to hear. And then perhaps most importantly, depending on whether you come at this from a sort of sector and policy angle or a practitioner angle, I wanted to ask for some favours essentially. We are developing the best practice framework, and we're developing a set of case studies to go alongside it. We've done about a third of them, but we are struggling up until this point to find post-16 settings where they're doing quite intensive work with these young people that we can case study and then share as best practice. So if you know of any, or you can think of any angles that you could take on that, I'd love to hear it. And secondly, we've talked a lot about our recommendations today, but obviously we're looking to take those forward. I'd like to hear your feedback on what you think about those recommendations and whether you've got any thoughts about how we should be pursuing them. And in order to collect the feedback on this, you'll see that we provided these little postcards. I would love it if we had comments from each of you on that. Put your name on them or don't, it's really up to you. It's obviously easier for us to get back to people and build that network. If you do, you can, when you've written them, either leave them on the table, we'll collect them and pop them up here. So I'm just going to leave you for sort of 5-10 minutes before they bring lunch in to have those conversations on your table. I'll circulate around to make those comments on the postcard and to give us any feedback that you have on the basis of having heard everything today, and any offers of support that you can make will be most welcome. Is that everything, Phil? Great. So thank you. This is also the last we're hearing from me up here, but thank you all for coming, for not having realised my nightmare this week for an empty room, and for, again, you were like extreme engagement in this. Skewer plaster is coming for lunch, so I'm personally excited. So please help yourself when it comes. We've got the room for at least another hour, but I know some of you will sort of trickle away, but please enjoy the lunch before you do. Thank you so much. Terry, our Director of Engagement, would be like, no. If you want to sign up to our newsletter to hear more about this work and about other work, the sign up sheet over there, or you can just QR code here. I feel like wait until you'd hopefully seen how helpful our work is before inviting you to do that when you're entering and you didn't know who we were. So I just thought I'd flag that as well. So thank you. Great.
Thank you. Really good for sharing.
I was actually going to say, but Ellie's always on it. Please, just take as many.